Okay, so you guys sent in this really in-depth guide all about nutrition for bodybuilding.
Mm-hmm.
And, we get it. It can be a lot to unpack, especially when you're trying to connect all the dots between what you eat and those actual changes in your physique. So we're diving deep into that today, trying to cut through the noise and really extract the most important, actionable insights from your source material. Basically, how to fuel those body composition changes you're all working towards.
And you're spot on. Your guide emphasizes the importance of not getting lost in the weeds. You want to understand how the food you choose directly impacts your muscle development, your metabolic efficiency, even the hormones that are critical for all those gains you're after.
And right off the bat, your guide hits on this fascinating point about how our bodies are basically wired for survival, right?
Mm.
Back in the day, our ancestors who were efficient at storing fat, they were more likely to make it through those tough times when food was scarce.
It's incredible how that ancient survival mechanism can still be so relevant today.
Totally. Your guide explains that if we drastically restrict calories, it can actually trigger that same survival mode in our bodies. And what happens? Our metabolism slows down, we hold on to fat more stubbornly, and those body composition changes we're after become even harder to achieve.
Exactly. And that's where your guide takes a really interesting turn. Instead of viewing food as the enemy, something to restrict and fear when aiming for body composition changes, it encourages us to see it as a powerful ally. To view food as fuel that can actually optimize our metabolism, stimulate the release of hormones that support fat burning and muscle growth, and ultimately lead to a much more sustainable and effective approach to achieving our fitness goals.
I love that shift in perspective. It's not about deprivation, it's about making strategic choices.
Exactly. And those choices really boil down to the three main macronutrients: proteins, carbohydrates, and fats. Your guide emphasizes that these macronutrients, working alongside exercise, are the real game changers when it comes to transforming our bodies.
So let's dive into each one, starting with protein, which your guide often refers to as the MVP for building muscle. But it's so much more than just aesthetics, right?
Absolutely. Protein is fundamental for repairing those microscopic tears that happen in our muscles during workouts and even just from daily activities. That repair process is what leads to muscle maintenance and growth. Your guide actually suggests that if you're not getting enough protein, your muscles might not recover properly, and you could actually see a decrease in your metabolism. So the takeaway for our listeners is this: if you're hitting the gym hard, the old recommendations for protein intake might not be cutting it. You've got to make sure you're getting enough to fuel that muscle growth.
Which brings us to what your guide calls Fallacy 1, this idea that the standard recommended dietary allowance, or the RDA, for protein is sufficient, especially if you're physically active. The RDA, we're talking about around 0.36 grams of protein per pound of body weight, which for someone weighing 200 pounds comes out to only about 72 grams a day.
That does seem surprisingly low when muscle growth is the goal.
Right, especially for those of us who are pushing ourselves in the gym.
Exactly. Your guide points to a substantial body of research that indicates that during intense training, sticking to that RDA could actually lead to muscle loss. Instead, it recommends a much higher range between 0.64 and 0.91 grams of protein per pound of body weight for anyone engaging in strenuous activity. So that's something to really keep in mind. Inadequate protein during training, that's a recipe for losing muscle and slowing down your metabolism.
That's a pretty significant difference.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so protein is the foundation for building and repair. Now, let's move on to carbohydrates, which often get a bad rap, but are absolutely essential as our body's primary source of energy.
No doubt. Carbs are our go-to fuel, especially for things like aerobic exercise, high-volume weight training, and those grueling workouts you might be doing. They're also crucial for recovery because they help replenish our glycogen stores. Those are like your muscles' readily available reserves of energy, ready to be tapped into when you need them.
Makes sense. And this is where things get interesting, because your guide tackles fallacy 2, the more carbs, the better.
That's a common misconception, isn't it? The idea that you can just load up on carbs without any consequences. But your guide emphasizes that for most people, unless you're extremely lean and specifically trying to gain weight, going overboard on high-carb foods can lead to fat gain just as easily as overeating fats.
So it's not just about the quantity, but finding that right balance for your activity level and goals.
Precisely. And the research cited in your guide is really eye-opening. Studies have shown that people can achieve similar improvements in body composition, strength, and endurance on diets where only around 40% of their calories come from carbs compared to diets with over 60%. What this really highlights is that the total number of calories you're consuming plays a more significant role in weight loss than the percentage of carbs in your diet.
So it's about looking at the bigger picture and making sure those calories are working for us, not against us.
Exactly. And that brings us to another really important point. It's not just how many carbs you eat, but the type of carbs that really matters. And that's where the glycemic index, or GI, comes into play, right?
Right. So the glycemic index essentially measures how quickly different carbohydrate-containing foods cause our blood sugar levels to rise. Now, high glycemic foods, they lead to a rapid spike in glucose, and that, in turn, triggers a surge in insulin.
And as we know, insulin plays a major role in how our body stores fat. Your guide explains that this sudden insulin release not only causes your energy levels to crash, making you feel sluggish and tired, but it also acts like like a delivery truck, efficiently shuttling that excess glucose and even fatty acids from the bloodstream straight into your fat cells for storage. It's like a double whammy for fat gain. And your guide even provides some examples from Table 1 to illustrate this, like instant rice with a GI of 128, Crispix cereal at 124, a baked potato at 121, and even a bagel, that seemingly innocent breakfast staple, clocks in at 103.
Wow, those are some seriously high numbers.
They are. Now, on the flip side, we have low glycemic foods, which generally rank below 70 on the GI scale. These provide a much more gradual and stable release of energy into the bloodstream, leading to a slower, more controlled insulin response. And that's exactly what we want for sustained energy during our workouts and just for feeling good throughout the day.
So it's like choosing a slow-burn fuel source, avoiding those energy dips and those fat storage spikes.
Exactly. Some examples from your guide's Table 1 include grapefruit juice at 69, green peas at 68, and an apple at 54. You can really see how making those lower GI choices can help keep your blood sugar stable, your energy levels up, and potentially reduce the amount of fat your body stores.
It's all about making those strategic choices.
Yeah.
Now, your guide also points out that when we combine different foods in a meal, the overall GI of the meal tends to be lower than that of its highest GI component.
That's a great point. And protein has a really helpful role here, too. Including protein in your meals actually helps lower the overall glycemic index by slowing down the rate at which those carbohydrates are absorbed into your bloodstream. This really emphasizes the importance of creating balanced meals, making sure you're getting a good mix of protein, healthy fats, and those complex carbohydrates.
So we've covered protein for muscle building and repair, carbohydrates for energy, and the importance of paying attention to the glycemic index. Now let's move on to fats, which have definitely had their fair share of controversy in the world of nutrition.
Absolutely. And your guide addresses this head-on with what it calls Fallacy 3, avoid fat entirely. A lot of diets tend to go to extremes with fat, either advocating for very low intake or, in some cases, promoting high-fat diets. But your guide emphasizes that neither extreme is usually the answer when it comes to long-term weight management and improving body composition.
It's about understanding the role fat plays in our bodies and finding that right balance, right?
Precisely. While it's true that eating excessive amounts of fat will lead to fat gain, completely eliminating fat is also a mistake. We actually need fat for a whole range of essential bodily functions.
Yeah, it's not just about calories in, calories out, right?
Exactly. Fat is essential for proper metabolic function, for the production of hormones, and it can even serve as a valuable source of energy. What your guide clarifies is that when you're in a negative energy balance, meaning you're burning more calories than you're consuming, your body can and will utilize dietary fat for fuel. So it's not about demonizing fat, but understanding its role and finding that sweet spot for your individual needs.
Which really challenges that old way of thinking that all dietary fat just automatically turns into body fat.
Exactly. And the research highlighted in your guide is really interesting here. Similar to what we saw with carbohydrates, studies have shown that weight loss can be quite similar across a pretty wide range of fat intake, from about 10 to 50% of your total calories, as long as you're managing your overall calorie consumption. So this really challenges that long-held belief that very low-fat, high-carb diets are the only way to go if you're looking to improve your body composition.
So it seems like there's more wiggle room than we might think when it comes to fats.
Yes, and that finding that right balance is key.
So we've got our building blocks, our fuel source, our essential fats. Now, your guide also delves into something called nutrient timing. So why is when we eat so important?
This is such a critical yet often overlooked aspect of nutrition. Your guide really emphasizes that the timing and the quality of your meals, especially in relation to your workouts, can make a huge difference in the results you see. Things like skipping breakfast, neglecting your post-workout nutrition, or choosing the wrong kinds of carbohydrates before you exercise can really sabotage an otherwise well-structured diet plan.
It's all about working with our body's natural rhythms and processes, isn't it?
Exactly. And one of the first things your guide highlights is that eating frequent, smaller meals throughout the day can actually give your metabolism a little boost. Because even the process of digestion itself burns calories.
So it's like keeping the engine running.
Exactly. And it specifically calls out breakfast as being crucial for maximizing fat loss, noting that our metabolism tends to be most active in the morning. So skipping breakfast might seem like an easy way to cut calories, but it could actually backfire, potentially leading to muscle loss and a decrease in your metabolic rate.
That's definitely not what we want.
Yeah, not at all. Now, equally important is the post-workout meal. After exercise, your metabolic rate stays elevated for a while, just like it is in the morning. But if you don't refuel properly after a workout, you could end up breaking down muscle tissue and actually slowing down your metabolism. Your guide explains that the process of repairing and building new muscle tissue, called protein synthesis, is significantly increased after exercise, and it stays elevated for over 24 hours. This makes it a prime window to provide your body with all the nutrients it needs to recover and grow.
And your guide recommends eating this post-workout meal pretty soon after you finish exercising and making it a bit larger than your other meals. It should contain about twice the normal amount of carbohydrates, and it actually suggests that high glycemic carbs are preferable in this instance. So it's all about context, right?
Exactly. Your body's primed to quickly replenish those depleted glycogen stores after a workout, and high glycemic carbs are the most efficient way to do that. Of course, you'll also need a good amount of protein in that post-workout meal to support muscle repair and minimize muscle breakdown.
So high glycemic carbs in this case are actually working in our favor.
Exactly. Now, your guide also cautions against a common mistake: consuming high glycemic carbohydrates right before a workout. It uses the example of a bagel, with that high GI of 103, as a popular but potentially counterproductive pre-workout snack.
Because that initial spike in blood sugar and the resulting insulin rush, those can actually zap your energy levels during your workout and make it harder for your body to burn fat, right?
That's exactly it. That blood sugar spike and that insulin rush, they essentially signal to your body to store energy rather than burn fat. So you're kind of working against yourself.
So we want to avoid that pre-workout energy crash and make sure our bodies are ready to burn fat efficiently. What does your guide suggest instead?
It recommends opting for low glycemic foods before exercise, which will provide a more sustained release of energy for better performance without depleting those post-workout energy stores. This can lead to better recovery and ultimately faster progress towards your goals.
Okay, so strategic nutrient timing can really make a big difference. Now, let's talk about how food can actually trigger our hormones.
This is where we see that powerful connection between what we eat and our internal chemistry. We already talked about how high glycemic foods trigger the release of insulin, which promotes fat storage. But your guide also brings up another key hormone, growth hormone, or GH.
And GH is generally considered one of the good guys, right? It plays a role in fat burning, muscle building, even supporting a healthy immune system.
That's right. And your guide points out that keeping our blood sugar levels stable, primarily by choosing those low glycemic foods, creates a more favorable environment for GH to do its job effectively.
So it's like setting the stage for optimal hormonal function.
Exactly. Now, your guide also talks about how the percentages of protein, carbs, and fat in our diet can actually influence levels of testosterone, which is a really crucial hormone for building muscle.
Good.
Right. It highlights that if your primary goal is rapid muscle gain, a diet with a lower ratio of protein to carbs, along with a moderately higher fat intake, can support maximal testosterone production. Now, it's important to clarify that this doesn't mean drastically reducing your protein intake overall, but rather increasing the percentage of carbohydrates you're consuming relative to protein.
That's a really important distinction.
It is. And your guide also mentions how the source of our food can impact testosterone levels, suggesting that vegetarian diets tend to result in lower levels compared to diets that include meat.
That's interesting.
It is. However, it also cautions against consuming too much red meat, particularly due to the saturated fat content and the potential risk of heart disease. Instead, it recommends focusing on healthier sources of fat, like those found in fish and monounsaturated fats from things like olive oil, sunflower oil, and canola oil. These fats can actually benefit our metabolism and support healthy testosterone production.
So it's about being mindful of the types of fats we're choosing.
Exactly. Now, as we wrap up, your guide has one final but incredibly important point. Consistency is absolutely key.
Consistency is key in so many areas of life. Right?
It really is. Your guide emphasizes that finding the perfect diet is truly a journey of experimentation and adjustment. What works amazingly well for one person might not be the best approach for another. The most crucial elements are patience, dedication, and maintaining consistency over time. It also advocates for making gradual changes in your weight, whether your goal is to lose or gain, to ensure you're making sustainable progress and building healthy long-term habits.
So it's not about quick fixes or drastic measures. It's about making those consistent, sustainable choices that add up over time.
Precisely. It's a long game.
To bring it all together, we've really explored this idea of viewing food not as the enemy, but as a powerful tool for transformation, as fuel for adaptation. We've delved into the vital roles of protein, carbohydrates, and fats, understanding how each one contributes to our overall health and fitness goals. We've also highlighted how crucial nutrient timing is, especially around our workouts, and how our food choices can have a direct impact on our hormonal balance.
It's been a really fascinating exploration of how all these pieces fit together. This deep dive into the material you sent has really provided a solid framework for understanding how to make more informed and effective nutritional choices.
Absolutely. It's about understanding the fundamentals so you can navigate the often confusing world of nutrition with confidence and create a diet plan that works for you and your individual goals.
I think that's a great takeaway.
So here's a final thought to leave you with. Given how adaptable our bodies are, how they're constantly responding to the environment and our habits, what seemingly small, almost imperceptible adjustments could you make to your daily eating routine that might create a significant positive ripple effect over the long term? Going beyond just the specific ratios and the timing we've discussed today, think about those subtle shifts in your relationship with food that could lead to lasting and meaningful change in your health and your physique.
That's a great question to ponder.
It is. And it's a reminder that even the smallest changes, when made consistently, can have a huge impact over time.
Absolutely.
So keep experimenting, keep learning, and keep pushing yourselves to reach those goals. And we'll be back next time with another deep dive.
Until then.
See you then.